A little girl walks into school and whispers 5 chilling words. Seconds later, the janitor freezes, looks at her belly, and frantically dials 911. The morning light spilled lazily through the tall glass windows of Lincoln Elementary, painting the empty hallways in soft gold. Mariana Torres pushed her cleaning cart slowly, the faint squeak of her sneakers echoing off the polished linoleum. For 3 years, she had worked these corridors, always arriving before sunrise, when the building was still wrapped in silence. To most, she was invisible, just another face in the background. But to Luciana, these quiet hours were her sanctuary. Born in Honduras, she had spent 12 years in the US, carving out a life built on hard work and resilience. Her husband, Andrew, a police officer, often left for his shift just as she came home. Different schedules, same dream, their love stitched together by sacrifice. But today felt different, heavier, as if something unseen lingered in the air. As Mariana rounded the corner near the second-grade classrooms, she noticed a small figure curled against the lockers. It was Emily, 7 years old, her tangled brown curls spilling across her face. Only, it wasn't the messy hair that stopped Mariana in her tracks. It was the way Sophie sat, arms wrapped tightly around her belly, as though protecting something fragile and forbidden. Her big brown eyes glimmered with unshed tears, her small shoulders carrying a weight no child should ever bear. "Doesn't start for another hour. What are you doing here so early?" Sophie looked up with startled eyes like a deer caught in headlights. For a moment, she seemed ready to run, her small body tensing as if preparing for flight. Instead, she whispered, something so quietly that Mariana had to kneel down to hear her. I don't want to go home," Sophie mumbled, her voice barely audible. Luciana's heart clenched. In her years of cleaning schools, she had learned to read the silent language of children. Some spoke through laughter echoing in hallways, others through artwork left on desks, and some, like Emily, spoke through the weight of their silence. "Why don't you want to go home, Mayam?" Mariana asked gently, using the Spanish endearment that came naturally when her maternal instincts kicked in. Emily's eyes darted around nervously, as if checking to make sure they were truly alone. She opened her mouth as if to speak, then closed it again. The conflict playing across her young features was heartbreaking, the desperate need to tell someone, wearing with a fear that seemed far too sophisticated for a child her age. "He says things," Sophie finally whispered, her small hand still clutched protectively around her middle. "The new daddy. He says things that make my tummy hurt." Mariana felt something cold settle in her chest. Every instinct honed by years of caring for others. Every lesson learned from her own difficult childhood. Every maternal fiber in her being suddenly went on high alert. She had heard enough playground confessions to know when a child was trying to tell her something important. "What kind of thing, sweetheart?" Mariana asked, keeping her voice steady despite the alarm bells ringing in her mind. But the question seemed to frighten Sophie more. She scrambled to her feet, backing away with eyes wide with panic. "I can't tell. I promised I wouldn't tell." Emily's voice cracked with the strain of holding back tears. "He said bad things happen when little girls tell secrets." Before Mariana could say another word, Sophie turned and ran down the hallway, her small footsteps echoing off the walls like a distress call that only Mariana seemed to hear. Left alone in the corridor, Mariana stared at the empty space where the frightened child had been moments before. Her hands trembled slightly as she picked up her cleaning supplies, but her mind was already racing far beyond the routine tasks ahead of her. In that moment, surrounded by the familiar sense of disinfectant and the soft hum of fluorescent lights, Luciana Rivera, the invisible woman who cleaned the mess others left behind, realized she might be the only person standing between a little girl and something terrible. The day ahead would be different. Everything would be different now. The rest of that Tuesday passed in a blur of routine tasks, but Luciana's mind remained fixated on Emily's frightened face. As she mopped floors and emptied trash cans, she found herself pausing at classroom doorways, searching for glimpses of the troubled little girl. During lunch break, Mariana positioned herself near the cafeteria entrance, watching the children stream past with their bright lunch boxes and cheerful chatter. When Sophie appeared, walking alone with her head down, Luciana's heart sank. The child moved like a shadow among her classmates, invisible in the way that only the deeply sad can be. From her quiet observation post by the supply closet, Mariana watched Sophie sit alone at the far end of a lunch table. While other children traded snacks and giggled over jokes, Sophie simply stared at her untouched sandwich, occasionally glancing toward the cafeteria windows as if calculating escape routes. "While everyone else sees the mess," Mariana murmured. To herself, "I see the pain." That evening, Mariana sat across from Daniel at their small kitchen table, pushing food around her plate while her husband recounted his day. Daniel Torres was a good man, steady, honest, and devoted to protecting their community. After 14 years as a police officer, he had learned to balance compassion with caution, a skill that served him well both on the job and at home. "You're distracted." "Tonight, m'amore," Daniel observed, setting down his fork. "Everything okay at work?" Mariana hesitated. How do you explain a feeling that sits heavy in your chest? How do you voice concerns about a child when you're not even sure what those concerns are? "There's this little girl at school," she began carefully. "Emily, something feels wrong." Andrew's expression grew more serious. "Wrong how?" "She's scared. Daniel really scared, and she said something about her stepfather that made my stomach turn." Mariana met her husband's eyes. "You know how you always tell me to trust my instincts about people? I do." Daniel leaned forward, his cop instincts engaging. "But Luciana, you have to be very careful with these situations. Sometimes what looks suspicious has an innocent explanation. And sometimes," he paused, choosing his words carefully, "sometimes getting involved can make things worse for everyone, including the child. So, I should just ignore it." Luciana's voice carried a sharp edge she rarely showed. "I'm not saying ignore it. I'm saying be smart about it. Document what you observe. Look for patterns, but don't jump to conclusions." Daniel reached across the table and squeezed her hand. "Your heart is in the right place, but we need to think with our heads too." That night, Mariana lay awake staring at the ceiling. Andrew's words echoing in her mind. She understood his caution. False accusations could destroy innocent people. But what about the cost of staying silent when a child might be in trouble? The next morning arrived grey and drizzly, matching Luciana's mood as she pushed her cart through the school hallways. She had just finished cleaning the main office when she spotted Sophie again, this time standing alone by the water fountain. Her small frame pressed against the wall as if trying to disappear. Mariana approached slowly, pretending to dust the nearby bulletin board while keeping the child in her peripheral vision. Emily's behavior was heartbreaking. She kept looking over her shoulder, flinching at sudden sounds, and wrapping her arms around herself in that protective gesture Mariana was beginning to recognize. "Good morning, Emily," Mariana said softly, not wanting to startle her. Sophie looked up with those same frightened eyes, but this time she didn't run. Instead, she took a small step closer to Luciana, as if drawn to the gentle warmth the woman radiated. "Mrs. Rivera." Emily's voice was barely a whisper. "Yes, sweetheart. Do you think?" Sophie started, then stopped, biting her lower lip. "Do you think grown-ups always tell the truth?" The question hit Mariana like a physical blow. In that moment, she realized Sophie wasn't just a sad child. She was a little girl caught in something she didn't understand, something that was teaching her to question the very foundation of trust that children should have in the adults meant to protect them. Mariana knelt down to Emily's eye level, her heart breaking at the wisdom and fear she saw in those young eyes. "Some grown-ups tell the truth and some don't," Mariana said honestly. But the important thing to remember is that when something feels wrong in your heart, it usually is wrong, and there are always good grown-ups who will listen and help. Emily's eyes filled with tears that still wouldn't fall. What if the good grown-ups don't believe me? Then you keep telling until someone does, Mariana whispered fiercely. You never stop telling the truth, Emily, promise me that. For a moment, Sophie looked like she might say more. Her mouth opened, words forming on her lips that could change everything. But then the first bell rang, shattering the moment like glass. Sophie stepped back, the walls going up around her again. I have to go to class, she mumbled, already moving away. As Mariana watched the little girl disappear around the corner, she knew with absolute certainty that this was just the beginning. Something was very wrong in Emily's world, and whether Daniel liked it or not, Mariana was going to find out what it was. She pulled out her phone and opened a new note, typing, Day 2. Emily, afraid to trust adults, asked if grown-ups always tell truth. Someone has broken this child's faith. The documentation had begun. Friday afternoon brought an unexpected opportunity. Mariana was organizing supplies in the janitor's closet when she heard soft footsteps in the hallway. Through the slightly open door, she saw Sophie wandering aimlessly, her backpack dragging, on the floor behind her. The school had emptied out 20 minutes ago, but Sophie seemed in no hurry to leave. If anything, she appeared to be delaying her departure, taking slow, deliberate steps toward the exit, as if each one required tremendous courage. Mariana stepped out of the closet, a gentle smile on her face. Emily, waiting for someone to pick you up. The little girl startled, then shook her head. I have to walk home today. Mum's working late again. That's a long walk for someone so small, Mariana observed, noting how Emily's shoulders seemed to shrink at the mention of going home. Would you like to sit with me for a few minutes? I have some crackers in my lunchbox. For the first time since their encounters began, Emily's face brightened slightly. She nodded and followed Mariana to a bench near the main entrance where afternoon sunlight streamed through the glass doors. Mariana pulled out a packet of graham crackers and offered them to Emily, who accepted them gratefully. They sat in comfortable silence for a moment, watching dust motes dance in the golden light. Mrs. Rivera, Sophie said suddenly, her voice small but clearer than usual. Yes, sweetheart. Sophie took a careful bite of her cracker, then looked up with those serious brown eyes that seemed to hold too much knowledge for a 7-year-old. Is this normal? The question hung in the air between them like a butterfly landing on a spider's web, delicate but potentially trapped by something dangerous. Is what normal, mi amore? Mariana asked gently, though her pulse had already begun to quicken. Emily's small hands fidgeted with the cracker wrapper. When someone you live with makes you play games you don't like, games that make you feel yucky inside? Mariana felt the world tilt slightly off its axis. She forced herself to breathe normally, to keep her expression calm and encouraging, even as every alarm bell in her mind began clanging. What kind of games, Emily? But the question seemed to frighten the child. Emily's eyes darted toward the exit, and she began to close up again, like a flower sensing an approaching storm. I can't say, Sophie whispered. He told me they were special games just for us. But she wrapped her arms around herself again, that protective gesture that was becoming heartbreakingly familiar. But they don't feel special. They feel scary. Luciana's hands trembled slightly as she reached for her water bottle, buying herself a moment to think. Every instinct screamed at her to press for more information, but Andrew's words about being careful echoed in her mind. Emily, she said finally, sometimes grown-ups ask children to do things that don't feel right. And when that happens, it's always okay to say no. It's always okay to tell another grown-up about it. Emily's eyes filled with tears. But what if they don't believe me? What if they think I'm making it up? Why would you make something like that up? I don't know, Sophie, said her voice breaking slightly. But he said, the new daddy said that nobody would believe a little girl over a grown-up man. He said, People would think I was being dramatic. The words hit Mariana like a physical blow. Someone had not only hurt this child, but had systematically worked to isolate her, to make her believe that seeking help was futile. The manipulation was sophisticated and cruel in a way that made Luciana's stomach turn. "Emily, listen to me very carefully," Mariana said, kneeling down so they were eye to eye. "There are grown-ups in this world whose job it is to keep children safe. And when a child tells the truth about feeling scared or uncomfortable, there are people who will listen and help." "Really?" Emily's voice was so small, so hopeful that it nearly broke Luciana's heart. "Really? I promise you that." For a moment, Sophie looked like she might say more. Her mouth opened and Mariana held her breath, sensing they were on the verge of a breakthrough that could change everything. But then a car horn honked outside, and Sophie jumped as if she'd been shocked. "That's my ride," Sophie said quickly, though Mariana hadn't seen anyone pull up. "I have to go." She grabbed her backpack and hurried toward the exit, but just before reaching the door, she turned back. "Mrs. Rivera, please don't tell anyone we talked about this. Please," he said. "Bad things happen when little girls tell secrets to the wrong people." Before Mariana could respond, Sophie pushed through the doors and was gone, leaving Mariana alone with the weight of what she'd just heard. Sitting on that bench in the empty school, surrounded by the familiar sense of chalk dust and floor wax, Mariana pulled out her phone and added to her growing notes. Day 5. Sophie asked if games that make you feel yucky are normal. Someone has told her adults won't believe children. Clear signs of emotional manipulation and fear. This child is crying out for help. As she locked her phone and gathered her cleaning supplies, Mariana made a decision that would change the course of both their lives. Emily's plea for secrecy had been heartbreaking, but Mariana knew that sometimes protecting a child meant betraying their trust in the short term to save them in the long term. The time for passive observation was over. It was time to act. But first, she needed to be very, very careful about how she proceeded. One wrong move could make everything worse for Emily, and Mariana couldn't bear the thought of failing this brave little girl who had found the courage to reach out. The weekend stretched ahead, giving Mariana 2 days to plan her next steps. She had a feeling those would be the longest 2 days of her life. Saturday morning found Mariana sitting at her kitchen table, cradling a cup of coffee that had long since gone cold. Daniel had left early for a weekend shift, leaving her alone with her thoughts and the weight of Emily's words echoing in her mind. Games that make you feel yucky inside. He said nobody would believe a little girl over a grown-up man. The phrases played on repeat, each repetition making Luciana's chest tighten with a familiar ache. Without realizing it, she found herself transported back 30 years to a small apartment in Honduras, where 8-year-old Mariana had sat on a similar chair, wrestling with secrets too heavy for her young shoulders. She remembered Senora Chen, her second-grade teacher, a woman with kind eyes and gentle hands who had noticed when Mariana began arriving at school earlier and staying later. She remembered the day Senora Chen had knelt down beside her desk and said words that would shape the rest of her life. "Luciana, when a child tells an adult a secret, it's because she needs help carrying the weight. You don't have to carry heavy things alone, Minia." Those words had given 8-year-old Mariana the courage to speak up about her uncle's special visits when her mother worked late shifts. Senora Chen had listened, believed, and acted, changing the trajectory of Luciana's entire childhood. Now, decades later, Mariana realized she had become the adult in Emily's story. She was the one with the power to listen, believe, and act. Standing up with renewed purpose, Mariana walked to her bedroom closet and pulled out a small wooden box from the top shelf. Inside, wrapped in tissue paper, was a faded photograph of Senora Chen and a handwritten note the teacher had given her on her last day of school. "Remember, Luciana, those who have been helped must help others pass on the kindness. Break the silence." With trembling fingers, Mariana touched the photograph, drawing strength from the memory of the woman who had saved her. Then she returned to the kitchen table and opened her laptop. For the next hour, she researched everything she could about recognizing signs of trouble in children, about proper reporting procedures, about how to support a child who was reaching out for help. Each article she read confirmed what her heart already knew. Sophie was displaying classic warning signs, and her fear of not being believed was tragically common. When Monday morning arrived, Mariana entered Lincoln Elementary with a new sense of purpose. She had spent the weekend preparing, both emotionally and practically, for whatever came next. As she pushed her cleaning cart down the familiar hallways, she found herself paying attention to details she'd never noticed before. The artwork on the bulletin boards told stories, some bright and cheerful, others dark and concerning. She paused at a display of family drawings and quickly found Emily's contribution. The picture made her heart sink. While other children had drawn smiling families holding hands under rainbow skies, Emily's family consisted of 3 figures: a small girl in the corner, a woman in the middle looking away, and a large, dark figure looming over both of them. The man in the drawing had no face, just a black void where features should be. Mariana carefully photographed the drawing with her phone, adding it to the documentation she'd been building. Then she noticed something that made her blood run cold. At the bottom of the page, in Emily's careful 7-year-old handwriting, were the words, "My family keeps secrets, Mrs. Rivera." Mariana spun around to find Sophie standing behind her, backpack clutched tightly to her chest. The child looked even smaller than usual, if that were possible, and there were dark circles under her eyes that suggested she hadn't been sleeping well. "Emily, sweetheart," Mariana said softly, quickly moving away from the bulletin board. "You're here early again." "I couldn't sleep," Sophie whispered. "I kept thinking about what you said about grown-ups who help children." Luciana's heart began to race. "What about it?" Sophie glanced around nervously, then stepped closer. If I told you something really important, would you promise to help? Me, even if it made other people mad?" The question hung between them like a bridge waiting to be crossed. Mariana knew that her answer would determine whether Sophie finally found the courage to speak her truth, or whether she would retreat back into the dangerous silence that had been imposed upon her. "Emily," Mariana said, kneeling down to meet the child's eyes, "I promise you that if you tell me something that shows you're not safe, I will do everything in my power to help you. Even if it's hard, even if it's scary, even if it makes some people angry." Emily's eyes filled with tears, and for the first time since Mariana had known her, those tears actually began to fall. "The new daddy," Sophie whispered, her voice breaking. "He does things that make me want to disappear, and he told me that if I ever told anyone, they would take me away from Mama forever." Mariana felt her world shift on its axis. This was it, the moment she had been preparing for, the moment when Sophie finally trusted her enough to speak the truth that had been trapped inside her for who knows how long. "Emily," Mariana said, her own voice thick with emotion. "Telling the truth about someone who hurts you will never make the good people take you away from your mama. The good people want to keep you safe and keep your family together. But sometimes to do that, we have to make some changes." Sophie nodded slowly, wiping her nose with the back of her hand. "I'm scared, Mrs. Rivera. I know you are, sweetheart. But you're also very brave. Do you know how brave you have to be to tell a grown-up when something is wrong? Really, really? And now we're going to figure out the best way to keep you safe." "Okay." For the first time in weeks, Emily's face showed something other than fear. It showed hope. That afternoon, during her lunch break, Mariana sat in her car in the school parking lot, staring at her phone. Emily's tearful confession that morning had left her feeling both relieved and terrified. Relieved that the little girl had finally found the courage to speak up, and terrified about what came next. She scrolled through her contacts until she found Clara Ruiz, her closest friend and fellow custodian at the school. Clara had been working at Lincoln Elementary for 8 years and had seen everything from playground accidents to family crisis. If anyone would understand the gravity of the situation, it would be Maria. 20 minutes later, Clara slid into the passenger seat of Luciana's carrying 2 cups of coffee from the teacher's lounge. "Hey, what's going on?" Clara asked, noting the worry lines creased deep around Luciana's eyes. "You sounded upset on the phone." Mariana took a steadying breath. "It's about Sophie Morales, the little girl in Mrs. Amanda's class. I think she's in trouble at home." Maria's expression grew serious. "What kind of trouble?" "The kind that makes a 7-year-old afraid to go home. The kind that makes her ask if certain games are normal." Luciana's voice dropped to a whisper. "The kind that makes her believe nobody will listen to her." Clara set down her coffee, her face grave. "Luciana, you need to be very careful here, very careful. You know what happened to Monica Rodriguez last year?" Mariana shook her head. Monica worked at Roosevelt Elementary. She reported a family for suspected problems. Turned out the father was innocent. The child had been coached by an angry ex-spouse to make false claims during a custody battle. Maria's voice carried a warning. Monica lost her job. The family sued the school district. It was a mess that destroyed multiple lives. But what if Sophie isn't lying? What if she really needs help? "Then you follow proper channels," Clara said firmly. "You don't go off on your own like some vigilante. You could make things worse. For Emily, worse for her family, and worse for yourself." She reached over and squeezed Luciana's hand. "I know your heart is in the right place, but you're not a trained counselor or social worker, and you're definitely not a detective." As if summoned by their conversation, Principal Dr. Richard tapped on the car window. Both women jumped, and Mariana quickly rolled down the window. "Ladies, is everything all right?" Dr. Richard asked, her sharp eyes taking in their serious expressions. "Just having lunch?" Mariana managed, forcing a smile. "Good, Luciana. I've been meaning to speak with you." Dr. Richard's tone carried a subtle edge. "Some teachers have mentioned you've been spending quite a bit of time interacting with students during your shifts. While we appreciate your caring nature, we need to remember that our custodial staff has specific roles and responsibilities." Mariana felt her cheeks burn. I'm sure your intentions are good." Dr. Richard interrupted smoothly. "But it's important we maintain appropriate boundaries. Students can become confused about authority figures when those lines blur. I trust you understand." After the principal walked away, Clara turned to Mariana with raised eyebrows. "See, you're already on their radar. If you push this the wrong way, you could lose your job. And then what good would you be to Sophie or anyone else?" That evening, Mariana sat at her kitchen table, picking at a dinner she couldn't taste. Daniel was working late again, leaving her alone with her spiraling thoughts. Every instinct told her that Sophie was in real danger. But Maria's warnings and Dr. Richard's veiled threat echoed in her mind. She thought about her job, not just the paycheck, but the purpose it gave her. Being at the school meant she could watch over kids like Emily, could be the eyes and ears that noticed when something was wrong. If she lost that position, her phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. "Mrs. Rivera, this is Emily's mom, Carmen. Sophie has been talking about you. Could we meet tomorrow after school? I'd like to discuss something important." Mariana stared at the message, her heart pounding. Emily's mother wanted to meet. This could be good, a concerned parent ready to listen and protect her child. Or it could be terrible. Someone coming to silence the woman who was getting too close to family secrets. She typed and deleted several responses before finally settling on, "Of course, I'll be in the main hallway after 3:30. As she set the phone down, Mariana caught her reflection in the dark kitchen window. She looked like a woman standing at a crossroads, and in many ways she was. She could step back, mind her own business, and protect her own stability. Or she could step forward into unknown territory, risking everything for a little girl who, had already shown incredible courage just by speaking up. The choice should have been obvious. So why did it feel so terrifyingly complicated? Later that night, as she lay in bed listening to Andrew's steady breathing, Mariana made a decision. Tomorrow's meeting with Valeria Morales would tell her everything she needed to know about which direction to go. But deep in her heart, she already knew the truth. Emily's frightened whisper, "He does things that make me want to disappear," had sealed her fate. Some lines once crossed changed you forever, and Mariana had already crossed that line the moment she decided to truly see Emily's pain instead of just walking past it. Whatever happened tomorrow, there was no going back now. The weight of truth, once acknowledged, could never be ignored again. She closed her eyes and whispered a prayer for wisdom, for courage, and most of all, for the strength to be the voice that Sophie desperately needed in a world that seemed determined to keep her silent. Tuesday afternoon, 3:35 p.m., Mariana stood in the main hallway, nervously adjusting her cleaning cart while watching the last few students filter out through the exit doors. Her palms were sweaty, and she kept checking her phone, wondering if Valeria Morales would actually show up. At 3:42, a woman appeared in the doorway, petite, tired-looking, with the same brown curls as Emily, but starry with premature grey. Valeria Morales moved hesitantly down the hallway, her eyes darting around as if she were afraid of being seen. "Mrs. Rivera." Carmen's voice was barely above a whisper. "Yes, that's me." Mariana stepped forward, noting how Carmen's hands shook slightly as she clutched her purse strap. "Thank you for coming." Valeria glanced around the empty hallway nervously. "Is there somewhere more private we could talk?" Mariana led her to a small alcove near the library, away from the main traffic areas. As they settled onto a bench, Mariana got her first good look at Emily's mother. The woman looked exhausted, with dark circles under her eyes that mirrored her daughter's. But more than that, she looked scared. "Sophie talks about you," Valeria began, her voice trembling. "She says you're kind to her, that you listen." "Sophie is a special little girl," Mariana replied carefully. "She seems troubled lately. I've been concerned." Carmen's composure cracked. Tears welled up in her eyes as she pressed a hand to her mouth, fighting to keep control. "You have no idea how hard this is," she whispered. "I don't know who to trust anymore." Mariana leaned forward, her maternal instincts taking over. "Carmen, what's going on? You can talk to me, Emily. She's been saying things, strange things. About my husband, her stepfather, things that don't make sense." Carmen's voice broke. "But she's just a child. Children have big imaginations, right? They misunderstand things that adults do." The words hit Mariana like ice water. This wasn't the concerned mother she'd hoped for. This was a woman in denial, desperately trying to convince herself that her daughter's cries for help were just childish fantasies. "What kind of things has Sophie been saying?" Mariana asked gently. Valeria wiped her eyes with a tissue. "She says Victor plays games with her that make her uncomfortable. But Victor is wonderful with children. He coaches Little League, for heaven's sake. He would never," she trailed off, unable to finish the sentence. "Carmen, when a child says something makes them uncomfortable, you don't understand," Valeria interrupted, her voice rising slightly before she caught herself and looked around. Nervously, "Victor provides for us. After Emily's father left, we had nothing. Victor saved us. He gave us a home, stability, a future." Her eyes pleaded with Luciana. "Sophie just needs time to adjust to having a father figure. She's been acting out because she misses her biological dad." Mariana felt her heart breaking for both mother and daughter. Valeria was trapped in an impossible situation, dependent on a man who might be hurting her child, unable to face the possibility that her salvation might be Emily's nightmare. "Has Sophie given you any specific details about these games?" Mariana pressed gently. Carmen's face flushed. She says he tells her it's their special secret, that he makes her promise not to tell anyone because people wouldn't understand." Her voice dropped to a whisper. But that could mean anything, right? Maybe he's planning a surprise for me, or teaching her something special. The rationalization was heartbreaking in its desperation. Mariana recognized the signs. A woman so financially and emotionally dependent that she couldn't afford to see the truth, even when it was destroying her child. "Carmen," Mariana said carefully, "what does your heart tell you? As Emily's mother, what do your instincts say?" For a moment, Carmen's carefully constructed denial wavered. Her face crumpled, and she looked like a woman drowning. "I don't know anymore. Sometimes I catch Sophie watching Victor with this look in her eyes, like she's afraid of him, and she's been having nightmares wetting the bed again." She looked up at Mariana with desperate eyes. "But I can't lose him. We can't. Go back to having nothing. You won't have nothing if you have Emily's safety and trust," Mariana said softly. "You don't understand." Valeria stood up abruptly, pacing a few steps away. "I work 2 part-time jobs just to buy groceries. Victor pays the rent, the utilities, Emily's school supplies. Without him, we'd be homeless within a month." She turned back to Luciana, tears streaming down her face. "How can I choose between my daughter's comfort and her survival?" The question hung in the air like a weight. Mariana realized she was witnessing the cruel mathematics of poverty and dependency, how economic desperation could trap good people in impossible situations. "Carmen, there are resources available, programs that help single mothers, agencies that provide support." "And how long would that take?" Valeria demanded. "Weeks? Months? What happens to Sophie while I'm filling out paperwork and waiting for help that might never come?" Mariana stood up too, her voice gentle but firm. "What happens to Sophie if you don't act? What happens to her spirit? Her ability to trust her sense of safety in the world?" Valeria stared at her for a long moment, the internal war playing out across her features. Finally, she sat back down heavily as if the weight of the conversation had physically exhausted her. "Promise me something," Valeria whispered. "Promise me you won't say anything to anyone yet. I need time to think, to figure out what to do. If Sophie really is, if what she's saying is true, I need to find a way to protect her without destroying our lives." Mariana felt torn between compassion for Carmen's impossible situation and urgency about Emily's safety. How much time? "A week. Just give me a week to sort this out, please." As Mariana watched Valeria walk away, shoulders bent under an invisible burden, she realized the situation was even more complicated than she'd imagined. Sophie wasn't just fighting against someone who was hurting her. She was fighting against a system of dependency and fear that made her own mother an unwilling accomplice to her silence. The weight of that realization settled on Luciana's shoulders like a heavy coat. A week felt like an eternity when a child's safety hung in the balance. That evening, Mariana found herself driving through the quiet residential streets near the school, her mind churning with Carmen's desperate plea for time. A week seemed like an eternity when she thought about Emily's frightened eyes and trembling voice. But breaking her promise to Valeria could destroy any chance of getting the family the help they needed. Lost in thought, she realized she had unconsciously driven to Maple Street, where retired teacher Mrs. Eleanor Evelyn lived in a small blue house surrounded by rose bushes. Mrs. Evelyn had been Luciana's unofficial mentor since her first day at Lincoln Elementary, offering wisdom and perspective whenever the job became emotionally overwhelming. Before she could second-guess herself, Mariana found herself walking up the familiar brick pathway and knocking on the front door. "Luciana, dear," Mrs. Evelyn's weathered face lit up with genuine pleasure as she opened the door. "What a lovely surprise. Come in, come in. I just put on a pot of tea." Eleanor Evelyn was 73 years old and had spent 45 years in elementary education before retiring. Her living room walls were covered with thank you cards from former students, photos of school, events, and certificates of appreciation from grateful parents. This was a woman who had dedicated her life to protecting and nurturing children. "You look troubled, sweetheart," Mrs. Evelyn observed as they settled into her cozy kitchen with steaming mugs of chamomile tea. "What's weighing on your heart?" Mariana hesitated, choosing her words carefully. "Mrs. Evelyn, if you suspected a child was in a difficult situation at home, but the family asked you to wait before taking action, what would you do?" The older woman's sharp blue eyes studied Luciana's face intently. "That's a very specific question. Oh dear, are we talking hypothetically, or is there a child who needs our help?" I can't give details," Mariana said quietly. "But there's a little girl who's been trying to tell me something important, something that makes me very worried about her safety." Mrs. Evelyn set down her teacup with deliberate care. "Luciana, in my 4 decades of working with children, I learned something that I want you to remember. Don't ignore the silence of a child, but also don't ignore their courage when they finally choose to speak." "What do you mean?" "When a child works up the courage to tell an adult about something that scares them, it means they've already been carrying that fear for much longer than we realize. Children don't speak up about serious problems lightly. They do it when the situation has become unbearable." Mariana felt tears prick her eyes. "But what if acting immediately causes more harm? What if it destroys the family?" Mrs. Evelyn leaned forward, her voice gentle but firm. "Dear, I've seen many families go through difficult times. The ones that survive and heal are the ones that face their problems head-on, with help from people who care. The families that fall apart are usually the ones where everyone pretends nothing is wrong until it's too late." She stood up and walked to a bookshelf, pulling out a small, worn notebook. "This is my wisdom journal, things I learned from 45 years of loving children who weren't always easy to love." She flipped through pages filled with neat handwriting until she found what she was looking for. "Here, I wrote this after a particularly difficult case 20 years ago. A child's safety is not negotiable. Adults may need time to process and plan, but children need protection immediately. The trauma of staying in a dangerous situation is always worse than the temporary disruption of getting help." Mariana absorbed those words, feeling something shift inside her chest. "But there's something else," Mrs. Evelyn continued, sitting back down. "When you're the adult a child chooses to trust, you become their voice in a world that often doesn't. Listen to small people. That's a sacred responsibility, not a burden." "I'm scared I'll make the wrong choice," Mariana admitted. "Oh, honey," Mrs. Evelyn reached across the table and patted Luciana's hand. "The wrong choice is the one where you do nothing. The right choice is the one where you act with love, courage, and the best interests of the child in your heart." She stood up again and walked to her refrigerator where dozens of photos were held in place with colorful magnets. She pulled off one particular picture, a graduation photo of a young woman in a cap and gown. "This is Hannah Lee. When she was 7 years old, she tried to tell me about some very frightening things happening at home. I almost didn't act because I was worried about making waves, about being wrong, about overstepping my boundaries." Mrs. Evelyn's voice grew soft with memory. "But something inside me said that Sarah's courage in speaking up deserved to be matched by courage in listening and acting. What happened? It was difficult. There were investigations, court hearings, temporary foster care while things got sorted out. But Sarah was ultimately reunited with her mother, and the person who was hurting her was removed from their lives." She smiled at the photo. "This picture was taken the day she graduated from medical school. She's a pediatrician now, working to protect other children." Mrs. Evelyn handed the photo to Luciana. "She sent me this with a note that said, 'Thank you for believing a little girl's whisper when the adults around her were shouting that everything was fine.'" Mariana stared at the photo, seeing hope and possibility where she had only seen fear and uncertainty. "Mrs. Evelyn, If a child told you about games that made them uncomfortable, about secrets they were told never to share, about being afraid to go home, what would you do? The older woman's eyes filled with a mixture of sadness and determination. I would document everything carefully, involve the proper professionals immediately, and make sure that child knew they were brave for speaking up. And I would never ever ask them to wait for the adults to figure things out while they continued to suffer. As Mariana drove home that night, Mrs. Evelyn's words echoed in her mind. A child's safety is not negotiable. Carmen's week felt less like a reasonable request and more like a dangerous delay. Sophie had found the courage to speak. Now it was time for Mariana to find the courage to act. Tomorrow, she would make some phone calls. Wednesday morning arrived with a sense of purpose Mariana hadn't felt in days. Following Mrs. Evelyn's advice, she had spent the previous evening researching proper protocols and preparing herself mentally for what lay ahead. Hidden in her cleaning supplies was a small notebook, her secret documentation of everything she had observed about Emily. As she pushed her cart through the hallways, Mariana found herself paying attention to details she had previously overlooked. In the art room, she discovered more of Emily's drawings in the recycling bin. Each one told a story of isolation and fear. A little girl always standing apart from others, dark clouds over houses, figures with no smiles. She carefully photographed each drawing, adding them to the evidence she was gathering. Her notebook grew thicker with observations. Day 8, Sophie arrives at school 45 minutes early, sits alone in hallway. Day 9, flinches when male teacher, raises voice during fire drill. Day 10, asked to use bathroom 4 times during morning, signs of anxiety. During lunch break, Mariana positioned herself where she could observe Sophie in the cafeteria. The pattern was always the same. Sophie sat alone, barely touched her food, and spent most of the time watching the exits as if planning escape routes. Today was different, though. As Mariana watched, she saw Sophie suddenly stand up and hurry toward the bathroom, her face pale and distressed. Something inside Mariana told her to follow. She found Sophie in the bathroom, sitting on the floor, in the corner, hugging her knees to her chest. The little girl was rocking back and forth, tears streaming down her face. "Emily, sweetheart, what's wrong?" Mariana knelt down beside her. "I can't stop thinking about tonight," Sophie whispered through her tears. "Mama has to work late again, and he said we're going to play that special game when it's just us two." Luciana's heart clenched. "Emily, listen to me very carefully. You don't have to play any games that make you uncomfortable. Do you understand that?" Sophie looked up with eyes full of desperation. "But he says if I don't, something bad will happen. To Mama, he says it's my job to keep the family together." The manipulation was clearer than ever. Someone was using Emily's love for her mother to keep her silent and compliant. The 7-year-old was carrying the weight of her entire family's stability on her small shoulders. "Emily, that's not your job. Your only job is to be a little girl. Adults are supposed to protect children, not the other way around." "Really?" Emily's voice was so small, so hopeful. "Really? And I'm going to make sure you're protected." That afternoon, while Sophie was in class, Mariana made a decision that would change everything. She pulled out her phone and called the school's guidance counselor, Mrs. Sarah Bennett. "Mrs. Bennett, this is Mariana Torres from the custodial staff. I need to speak with you about something very important regarding one of our students." 20s. Minutes later, they sat in Mrs. Bennett's office. Emily's drawings spread across the desk like pieces of a heartbreaking puzzle. "How long have you been documenting this?" Mrs. Bennett asked, flipping through Luciana's careful notes. 2 weeks. But I've been concerned for longer than that." Mrs. Bennett studied the evidence with the eye of someone who had seen too many similar cases. "This is comprehensive, Luciana. These behavioral patterns combined with the child's own words. We need to act immediately. What happens next? I'll contact Child Protective Services today. They'll want to interview Sophie in a safe environment, probably here at school tomorrow. We'll also need to notify the principal and involve law enforcement if necessary. Mariana felt a mixture of relief and anxiety. What about Emily's mother? She asked me to wait a week before doing anything. Mrs. Bennet looked up from the documentation with serious eyes. Luciana, I understand the mother's position, but we can't ask a child to endure another week of fear and potential harm while adults figure out their complicated feelings. Sophie has already shown incredible courage by speaking up. Our job now is to match that courage with action. As Mariana left the guidance office, she felt the weight of responsibility shifting from her shoulders to those of trained professionals. But she also felt something else. Pride in Emily's bravery and her own determination to listen when a little girl whispered her truth. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, but tonight Sophie would sleep, knowing that help was finally coming. The invisible woman had become visible when it mattered most. Thursday morning brought an unexpected development that made Luciana's blood run cold. As she arrived at school, she noticed an unfamiliar car in the parking lot, a shiny black SUV that seemed out of place among the modest vehicles typically driven by school staff and parents. Her question was answered an hour later when she saw him walking down the main hallway, Victor Thompson, Emily's stepfather, striding confidently toward the principal's office. He was exactly what Mariana had expected and feared. Tall, well-dressed, with a kind of easy smile that charmed adults while hiding darker intentions from children. "Good morning." He nodded pleasantly to Mariana as he passed, his voice warm and friendly. To anyone watching, he appeared to be the perfect concerned stepfather, arriving early for what she assumed was a parent-teacher conference. But Mariana noticed what others might miss. Through the glass windows of the main office, she watched his body language carefully. With the adult staff, Victor was all charm and confidence, laughing at Dr. Richard's jokes, complimenting Mrs. Amanda on her classroom decorations, presenting himself as the engaged family man. However, when Sophie was called to the office to join the meeting, everything changed. Mariana positioned herself where she could observe through the hallway window, and what she saw made her stomach turn. The moment Sophie entered the room, her entire demeanor shifted. The little girl who had been slowly opening up to Mariana over the past weeks suddenly became a different child, shoulders hunched, eyes downcast, moving with the careful steps of someone walking through a minefield. But it was Marcus's transformation that truly alarmed Luciana. His friendly smile remained in place for the adults, but when he looked at Emily, his hand reached out and rested on the child's shoulder. To the teachers, it looked like an affectionate gesture, but Mariana saw how Sophie flinched, how Marcus's fingers pressed just a little too firmly, how the child seemed to shrink under his touch. "She's such a sensitive little thing," she heard Victor say through the slightly open door, his voice carrying that perfect note of concerned stepfather. "Sometimes she gets overwhelmed and says things that don't quite make sense. We're working with her on expressing her feelings more appropriately." The manipulation was masterful. In just a few sentences, he had planted seeds of doubt about Emily's credibility while positioning himself as the patient, understanding parent figure. Mariana watched Dr. Richard and Mrs. Amanda nod sympathetically, completely unaware that they were witnessing a predator laying groundwork to discredit his victim. "Emily's been having some adjustment issues," Victor continued, his hand still resting on the child's shoulder. "New family dynamics can be confusing for children. Sometimes they misinterpret normal parental guidance as something more concerning." Sophie remained silent throughout the entire meeting, but Mariana could see the tension in every line of the child's small body. When Victor suggested that Sophie might benefit from less interaction with adult staff members who aren't trained, in child psychology, Mariana felt a chill run down her spine. He knew somehow Victor Thompson knew that Sophie had been talking to her. After the meeting ended, Mariana watched through the window as Victor walked Sophie toward the exit. His hand remained on her shoulder the entire time, and to observers, it looked protective. But Mariana saw it for what it really was, a display of control, a reminder to Sophie of who held the power in their relationship. Just before reaching the door, Victor stopped and said something quietly in Emily's ear. Mariana couldn't hear the words, but she saw Emily's face go pale and her small hands begin to tremble. When Sophie returned to class 20 minutes later, she was a shell of the child who had been slowly learning to trust again. The progress they had made over weeks of careful conversation had been erased in a single meeting. During lunch, Mariana found Sophie sitting alone in the library, staring blankly at a book she wasn't reading. "Emily, sweetheart, are you okay?" Sophie looked up with eyes that seemed older than her 7 years. "Mrs. Rivera, I can't talk to you anymore. He said that people who cause trouble for families sometimes disappear. And he said, you've been causing trouble." The threat was clear, even delivered through the words of a frightened child. Victor Thompson wasn't just manipulating Emily. He was sending a message to anyone who might try to help her. But as Mariana looked into Emily's terrified eyes, she realized something important. The fact that Victor felt the need to threaten and intimidate meant that Emily's courage in speaking up was already threatening his control. His visit to the school wasn't just manipulation, it was desperation. "Emily," Mariana whispered, "sometimes, when bad, people get scared that their secrets might come out. They try to scare everyone else into staying quiet, but that doesn't mean we stop telling the truth." Emily's eyes filled with tears. "I'm so scared, Mrs. Rivera. I know you are, sweetheart, but help is coming. I promise you that." As Mariana watched Sophie walk back to class, she knew that time was running out. Victor Thompson was clearly a master manipulator who had spent years perfecting his ability to charm adults while terrorizing children. But he had made one crucial mistake. He had underestimated the bond between a frightened little girl and the woman who had chosen to see her pain. The battle lines were now clearly drawn. That afternoon, as the final bell rang and students flooded toward the exits, Mariana noticed Sophie lingering by her locker, moving with deliberate slowness. Every other child rushed past her toward freedom, but Sophie seemed to be delaying the inevitable moment when she would have to go home. Mariana approached carefully, mindful of Marcus's threats, but unable to abandon the frightened child. "Emily, do you need help with anything?" Sophie looked around nervously, then stepped closer to Luciana, her voice barely a whisper. "Mrs. Rivera, can I ask you something? Something really important." "Of course, sweetheart." Emily's small hands fidgeted with her backpack straps, and for a long moment she seemed to be gathering every ounce of courage she possessed. When she finally spoke, her words came out in a rush, as if she was afraid she might lose her nerve. "Mrs. Rivera, do all stepdaddies, do they all?" Emily's voice caught and she took a shuddering breath. "Do all stepdaddies do the things that make you feel scared and yucky inside?" The question hit Mariana like a physical blow. In just a few words, Sophie had revealed the heartbreaking scope of her confusion and pain. This little girl genuinely believed that what was happening to her was normal, that all children with stepfathers experienced the same fear and discomfort. Mariana knelt down so she was at Emily's eye level, her heart breaking for the innocence that had been stolen from this brave child. "No, Emily," Mariana said firmly but gently. "Good stepdaddies, loving stepdaddies, never make children feel scared or uncomfortable. They protect children. They make them feel safe and loved, and they never ask children to keep scary secrets." Emily's eyes widened, as if this information was completely new to her. "Really? But Victor said that all daddies have special games with their kids, and that I was lucky because he chose me to be his favorite." The manipulation was even more sophisticated than Mariana had realized. Victor hadn't just been hurting Emily. He had been systematically warping her understanding of normal family relationships, making her believe that fear and discomfort were expressions of love and special attention. "Emily, listen to me very carefully," Mariana said, placing her hands gently on the child's shoulders. "Adults who truly love children never make them feel scared. They never ask children to keep secrets about games or special attention. And they never ever tell children that uncomfortable feelings are normal." Tears began to stream down Emily's face. "Something really is wrong. It's not just me being dramatic," he says. "Something is very wrong, and it's not your fault, not even a little bit." Emily's small body began to shake with the weight of this revelation. For months, perhaps longer, she had been carrying the burden of believing that her fear and discomfort were character flaws, signs that she was ungrateful or overly sensitive. "Mrs. Rivera," Sophie whispered, looking around to make sure they were alone, "if what's happening to me isn't normal, does that mean someone can make it stop?" The hope in her voice was simultaneously heartbreaking and inspiring. Despite everything she had endured, despite all the psychological manipulation designed to make her feel powerless, Sophie still had enough hope left to believe that rescue was possible. "Yes, Emily, someone can and will make it stop, but I need you to trust me completely, okay? Can you do that?" Sophie nodded, wiping her nose with the back of her hand. "Tomorrow, Mrs. Bennet is going to want to talk with you. She's going to ask you questions about the things Victor does that make you feel scared and uncomfortable. I need you to tell her everything, even if it's hard to say out loud. Can you be brave enough to do that? Will you be there with me? If you want me to be, I'll find a way to be there." Sophie seemed to draw strength from this promise. "Mrs. Rivera, will they make sure Mama is okay too? Because I think maybe Mama is scared of him too, but she doesn't know how to make it stop either." The insight was remarkable for a 7-year-old. Despite her own trauma, Sophie was still thinking about protecting her mother, still understanding that they were both trapped in a web of fear and control. "The people who are going to help us, they'll make sure both you and your mama are safe. They'll help your mama understand that there are ways to be safe and still have a home and food and all the things you need." For the first time in weeks, Emily's face showed something other than fear. It showed hope. "Mrs. Rivera, thank you for believing me when nobody else would listen." As Mariana watched Sophie walk toward the exit, her steps slightly more confident than they had been in days, she felt a mixture of pride and determination. Tomorrow would bring the moment of truth, when Sophie would finally have the chance to tell her story to people with the power to act on it. But tonight, for the first time in months, Sophie would go to sleep knowing that help was coming, that her fear was valid, and that she wasn't alone in her fight for safety. The 3 words, "Do all stepdaddies," had finally opened the door to Emily's rescue. Friday morning arrived with a sense of destiny. Mariana arrived at school early, her heart pounding as she prepared for what could be the most important day of Emily's young life. Mrs. Bennet had arranged for a child advocate to visit the school, someone specially trained to interview children in difficult situations. At 9 a.m., Mariana received a text that made her hands shake. "Mrs. Rivera, this is Carmen. Victor found out Sophie has been talking to people at school. He's very angry. I'm scared. Can you help us?" Without hesitation, Mariana forwarded the message to Mrs. Bennet and called her husband, Andrew. For the first time since this all began, she needed her police officer husband's expertise. "Andrew, I need your help. There's a child in danger, and her mother just reached out to me. How quickly can protective services act?" "If there's immediate danger, very quickly," Daniel replied, his professional instincts kicking in. "I'm calling this in now. Where are you?" "At the school. Emily's here, but I don't know for how long." Within 30 minutes, trained professionals arrived at Lincoln Elementary. Mrs. Bennet escorted Sophie to a safe, comfortable room where she could speak freely without fear of being overheard or interrupted. Mariana waited anxiously in the hallway, praying that Sophie would find the courage to tell her complete story. Through the window, she could see the child advocate, a gentle woman with kind eyes, sitting across from Emily, creating a space where truth could finally emerge. Inside the interview room, Sophie sat small and nervous, but there was something different about her today. The hopelessness that had shadowed her for weeks was replaced by a quiet determination. "Emily," the advocate said softly, "Mrs. Rivera tells me you've been very brave by speaking up about things that worry you. Can you tell me about the games Victor plays with you?" Emily's voice was barely audible at first, but as she continued talking, her words grew stronger. She spoke about being told these games were normal, about secrets she wasn't allowed to share, about feeling scared and confused, but being told she was special. Through the window, Mariana watched the professionals, taking careful notes, their faces growing more serious with each revelation. Mrs. Williams stepped into the hallway and gave Mariana a significant look. "We have enough," she whispered. "The authorities are moving now." Meanwhile, Sophie continued her brave testimony, describing not just what happened to her, but her fears for her mother. "Mama's scared too," Sophie said. "Victor gets angry when she asks questions. I think he hurts her feelings the same way he hurts mine." The advocate nodded understandingly. "Emily, you're helping us understand how to keep both you and your mama safe. You're being incredibly brave." While Sophie continued her interview, events were unfolding rapidly outside the school. Daniel had coordinated with Child Protective Services and local police to ensure Valeria and Emily's immediate safety. At 11:30 a.m., Valeria arrived at the school in a police car, tears streaming down her face, but relief evident in her eyes. She had made the hardest decision of her life, choosing her daughter's safety over her own financial security. "Is Sophie okay?" were her first words to Mrs. Bennett. "She's safe and she's been incredibly brave," Mrs. Bennett assured her, "and you made the right choice by reaching out." Inside the interview room, the advocate gently informed Sophie that her mother was at the school and wanted to see her. "Your mama loves you very much, Emily. She wants to make sure you're safe." When mother and daughter were reunited in Mrs. Bennett's office, Sophie ran into Carmen's arms. "Mama, I was so scared to tell because I thought you'd be mad at me." "Oh, my baby," Valeria sobbed, holding Sophie tightly. "I'm not mad at you. I'm proud of you for being so brave, and I'm sorry it took me so long to listen." The authorities had acted swiftly. Victor Thompson was being questioned by police, and a temporary restraining order was being processed to keep him away from both Valeria and Emily. Over the following weeks, Mariana watched in amazement as a comprehensive support system activated around Sophie and Valeria like a safety net that had been waiting for years to be deployed. What had seemed impossible just days ago, escaping Marcus's control while maintaining stability, was becoming reality through the coordinated efforts of caring professionals. Sophie received counseling with Dr. Olivia Chen, a child psychologist, who specialized in helping young victims heal from trauma. During their first session, Dr. Chen asked Sophie to draw pictures of her feelings. The contrast between Emily's earlier dark, isolated drawings and these new ones was remarkable. Slowly, sunshine began appearing in her artwork again. "Sophie is incredibly resilient," Dr. Chen told Mariana during one of their coordination meetings. "Children have an amazing capacity to heal when they're placed in safe environments with consistent support. Her willingness to trust you initially may have saved her years of additional trauma." Carmen, meanwhile, was working with a social worker named Monica Alvarez, who helped her navigate the complex maze of resources available to families in crisis. Monica connected Valeria with job training programs she never knew existed, temporary housing assistance and legal aid to help with the protective orders against Marcus. "I spent so many years believing I had no options," Valeria confided to Mariana one afternoon as they sat in the school parking lot. "Victor made sure I thought He was my only lifeline, but Monica showed me that there are entire systems designed to help women like me start over safely. The legal proceedings moved swiftly. Daniel kept Mariana informed about the case's progress, explaining how her careful documentation had provided crucial evidence. Your notes, the photographs of Emily's drawings, your observations about behavioral changes, all of that created a timeline that corroborated Emily's testimony. He told her without that foundation of evidence, the case would have been much more difficult to prove. Victor Thompson was arrested and charged with multiple offenses. The investigation revealed that Sophie wasn't his first victim. There had been complaints from his previous relationships that had never been fully investigated. Emily's courage in speaking up had potentially prevented other children from experiencing similar trauma. But perhaps the most remarkable change was in Sophie herself. Week by week, Mariana watched the frightened, withdrawn child transform back into the bright, curious 7-year-old she was meant to be. Emily's appetite returned. She began sleeping through the night again, and most importantly, she started trusting adults again. During lunch breaks, Sophie would often seek out Luciana, not because she needed protection anymore, but because she wanted to share good news about her day. Mrs. Rivera, I got an A on my spelling test. Or, Mrs. Rivera, I made a new friend in art class. Mrs. Evelyn visited the school frequently during this period, taking special interest in Emily's recovery. She told Mariana one day, in all my years of teaching, I've learned that children are remarkably resilient when they have even one adult who believes in them completely. You were that adult for Emily. The older woman pulled out her wallet and showed Mariana a new photo. Sophie and Valeria together at a park, both smiling genuinely for the first time in months. Valeria sent me this yesterday. She wanted to thank the village that helped save her daughter. 1 month after the intervention, Sophie brought Mariana a special project she had completed in art class. It was a collage titled My Heroes, featuring pictures of Mrs. Bennet, Dr. Chen, Officer Andrew, and in the center, a carefully drawn picture of Mariana with her cleaning cart. "Why did you put me in the middle?" Mariana asked, touched by the gesture. "Because you were the first one to see me," Sophie replied, with the profound simplicity that only children possess. "Everyone else helped after you saw me, but you were the one who noticed I was invisible." As winter turned to spring, the temporary arrangements became permanent ones. Valeria found a steady job as a medical assistant. After completing a training program, they moved into a small 2-bedroom apartment in a safe neighborhood with good schools. Sophie joined the school choir and started taking swimming lessons at the community center. The transformation was so complete that newcomers to the school would never have guessed the trauma these two had endured. But Mariana knew, and she watched over them with the protective instincts of someone who had helped orchestrate their rescue. During Sophie's counseling sessions, Dr. Chen worked with her to understand the difference between healthy and unhealthy adult behavior. Sophie needed to rebuild her ability to trust, the psychologist explained to Luciana. But more than that, she needed to learn that what happened to her was not normal, not her fault, and not something she should ever have to endure. Again, the ripple effects extended beyond Sophie and Carmen. The school implemented new training for all staff members about recognizing signs of children in distress. Dr. Richard, initially resistant to getting involved, became an advocate for better protocols to protect vulnerable students. Mrs. Bennet started a support group for school staff who wanted to learn more about identifying and helping at-risk children. Emily's case taught us that sometimes the person best positioned to help a child isn't the trained counselor or teacher. She told the group, sometimes it's the custodian who works early morning shifts, or the cafeteria worker who notices a child never eats lunch, or the crossing guard who sees which children seem afraid to go home. 6 months later, on a bright Tuesday morning in spring, Mariana was cleaning the hallway windows when she heard familiar footsteps running toward her. Sophie appeared around the corner, her backpack bouncing as she hurried to catch Mariana before the first bell rang. Mrs. Rivera, Sophie called out, her face glowing with excitement. I have something really important to show you. Sophie pulled a folded paper from her backpack and handed it to Mariana with ceremonial importance. As Mariana unfolded it, her eyes filled with tears. It was a drawing unlike any Sophie had created. Before, vibrant with color, showing a woman in work clothes standing next to a small girl, both surrounded by rays of sunshine. At the top, in Emily's best handwriting, were the words, "My invisible hero." Below the drawing, Sophie had written a short essay. Mrs. Rivera is my hero because she saw me when I was scared, and she helped me when I didn't know how to help myself. She listened to my words when I was too afraid to speak loud. She showed me that grown-ups can be safe and kind. Now I am happy every day because she helped me find my voice. Emily, this is the most beautiful thing anyone has ever given me, Mariana said, kneeling down to hug the radiant child who bore no resemblance to the frightened girl she had first encountered. In that hallway months ago, Mrs. Rivera, I have a question for you, Sophie said, her voice carrying the confidence that comes from being truly heard and protected. What's your question, sweetheart? Will you promise me that if you ever meet another little girl or boy who's scared like I was, you'll help them too? Will you promise to see them even if they feel invisible? Mariana looked into Emily's bright, trusting eyes and saw not just this one child's healing, but the potential for countless other children who might need someone to notice their pain and act with courage. I promise, Emily. And you know what? I think you're going to grow up to be someone who helps other children too. Sophie smiled with the wisdom of someone who had learned that being heard and believed could transform fear into hope. I want to be a counselor like Dr. Chen. I want to help kids know that when scary things happen, it's not their fault, and there are always good grown-ups who will listen. As Sophie skipped off to class, Mariana carefully folded the drawing and placed it in her work locker next to the photo Mrs. Evelyn had given her of Hannah Lee, the girl who had grown up to become a pediatrician after being helped by a caring teacher decades ago. At the water fountain, a little girl lingered longer than most, her tiny fingers tracing patterns on the cool metal as if stalling for time before heading back to class. Near the library, another child sat cross-legged on the floor, sketching dark shapes on crumpled paper. Some of these children were probably lost in harmless daydreams. But Mariana knew better now. Some, like Sophie once had been, were silently carrying storms inside them, scared, confused, and praying that someone, anyone, would notice. Emily's rescue had changed Mariana forever. She was no longer just the quiet custodian pushing a cleaning cart through endless hallways. She had become something else, a silent guardian, watching closely, ready to see what others overlooked. Her eyes had been opened to a world most adults ignored, a world where small signs often carried big secrets. That afternoon, Mrs. Evelyn stopped by for her weekly volunteer reading session. She found Mariana in the supply closet, carefully stacking materials, Emily's colorful drawing proudly taped inside her locker door. "How does it feel, Mrs. Evelyn?" asked with a knowing smile, "to know you changed the course of a child's entire life?" Mariana paused, her hand brushing over the drawing. "It feels like I finally understand what you meant months ago, about how we're all part of a chain, passing courage from one person to another. Sophie helped me be braver than I ever thought I could be. She taught me that listening isn't always enough. Sometimes you have to act, even when your voice is shaking." Mrs. Evelyn nodded softly, pride shining in her eyes. "And now Sophie will grow up knowing her voice matters. She'll know adults can be trusted, and that asking for help is strength, not weakness. That knowledge will stay with her forever, and one day she'll pass it on to another child who needs it." Later, as Mariana finished her shift, she reflected on how far they had come since that first morning, since the day she found a frightened little girl hiding in the hallway shadows. Sophie was safe now, thriving, dreaming about a future where she would help others. Valeria had rebuilt her life with dignity and independence. Even Victor was facing consequences, no longer able to hurt anyone else. But the biggest transformation was inside Mariana herself. She had learned that heroism wasn't about grand gestures, power, or recognition. It was about choosing to see pain when everyone else looked away, about stepping forward when silence was easier, about believing a whisper when the world screamed otherwise. The hallways of Lincoln Elementary looked exactly the same, but Mariana saw them differently now. Each day brought new chances to notice, to listen, and to act with love. Somewhere, right now, another child might be carrying a secret too heavy to bear, hoping someone would finally see them. As she locked up her supplies and headed toward the exit, Mariana smiled faintly, a quiet promise in her heart. When that moment came, she'd be ready. The invisible hero would always be watching, always listening, always prepared to turn a frightened child's whisper into a voice, strong enough to be heard. Emily's drawing remained taped inside her locker, a daily reminder that sometimes the most important battles are fought in quiet moments, through gentle conversations, and in the courage to care when others turn away. The work wasn't finished, but neither was the hope, because sometimes one caring adult can change a child's entire world.